Polish woman Magdalena Kralka rose to a leading position in a Krakow-based criminal group in 2017 after her boyfriend was killed by the police. Soccer ultras Adrian Zielona and several accomplices had kidnapped a rival whom they subjected to a brutal beating, shattering his kneecaps and nearly strangling him to death. Law enforcement launched a crackdown on the gang that culminated with the fatal shooting of Zielona and the arrest of a number of members. In the power vacuum, Kralka, then in her early 30s, took control of the organization, into which she recruited more of the city's soccer hooligans. At one point, the gang was suspected of monopolizing the drug trade in Krakow, in addition to running extortion rackets and carrying out violent attacks on their rivals. Under Kralka's leadership, they imported hundreds of pounds of marijuana and cocaine into southern Poland from contacts in Holland and Spain. The woman, who became known as the Queen of the South, as well as Poland's most beautiful gangster, avoided capture during a police raid in 2018. On November the 24th, local law enforcement issued a warrant for her arrest, and she was subsequently red noticed by Interpol, joining the list of its most wanted criminals. The authorities believed that she could be hiding in Spain, Thailand, or Ukraine, but ultimately tracked her down to Budapest, Hungary. After months of investigative efforts, the police moved in to arrest Kralka in February of 2019, but she was able to flee Hungary. Following a 20-hour international operation, she was caught while trying to cross the border into Slovakia. She was reportedly found in the trunk as a driver was transporting her into the country. Kralka applied for asylum, arguing that she wouldn't get a fair trial in Poland, but was denied. She was surrendered to the custody of a specialized unit from Poland's Central Police Investigation Bureau that was nicknamed the Shadow Hunters. Working in conjunction with international agencies, they'd been trying to track her down since she'd fled her homeland. Kralka's charges included leading a criminal group, drug trafficking, and obstructing justice. Number 10. Melissa Calderon. Mexican woman Melissa Margarita Calderon Ojeda started her criminal career with the Sinaloa cartel in the mid-2000s, when she was in her early 20s. Through her ruthlessness and notoriously aggressive temper, Calderon quickly gained prominence and came to command an enforcer branch of Sinaloa called the Damaso Cartel in 2008. At that time, the Sinaloa cartel was headed by notorious drug baron Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The enforcer group under Calderon's command was formed by around 50 well-trained assassins and operated under the leadership of founder Damaso Lopez Nunez. He was once an official in the Mexican prison system who was believed to have engineered El Chapo's first brazen escape in 2001 and who briefly succeeded him as the leader of Sinaloa following his capture in 2017. About a decade prior, Calderon, who was nicknamed La China, had risen through the ranks and developed a feared persona, which was only enhanced by the fact that she'd often posed for photos while holding firearms. She imposed her authority over territories in the state of Baja California Sur, which included the capital La Paz and the popular tourist resort of Cabo San Lucas. Her organization not only provided protection to leading cartel figures, but also ensured the territory was protected as it acted as a conduit for the drug trade into the US. In June of 2015, Calderon was asked to step down as commander of her enforcer group in favor of Abel El Grande Quintero, another cartel hitman who'd recently been released from prison. Calderon took offense to the replacement, particularly since Quintero was believed to have fatally strangled her boyfriend, Eric Davalos von Borstel. The latter had introduced Calderon to the cartel life, and she had his name tattooed on her forearm. The female crime boss broke off from the Damaso cartel to form her own organization, called Las Fuerzas, along with her new boyfriend, Hector Pedro Camarena Gomez, who was known as El Chino. A brutal internal war ensued between Calderon and El Grande's organizations, as resources to stake her claim on La Paz, Cabo San Lucas, and beyond. Calderon commanded hundreds of drug dealers and assassins, locally known as sicarios. Las Fuerzas members were reportedly identifiable by the fact that they rode red Italian motorbikes. The war between Calderon and Quintero resulted in a dramatic rise of death rates in La Paz. As reported by the Daily Mail in 2014, there had been 46 murders, and that same number was matched in just 2 months in 2015 as the two cartel leaders battled for control of the area. Throughout her criminal career, before and during the war with Quintero, Calderon was believed to have been responsible for at least 150 murders, some of which she'd ordered and others in which she directly participated. She became infamous for kidnapping victims from their homes and then dumping their mutilated and dismembered bodies on their doorsteps as a warning to others that would challenge her. Calderon was known to have police officers on her payroll, but for those that she couldn't control, bringing down her organization and putting an end to the bloodshed became the highest priority. While she was hunted by both the rival cartel and law enforcement, Calderon was forced to change vehicles and safe houses with increasing frequency. One of her lieutenants, Rogelio El Tyson Franco, arranged for her to buy a pickup truck from 2 of his friends. In early August of 2015, Calderon chose to have them murdered instead of paying, which angered Franco, who threatened to go to the police. Calderon consequently cut his forearms, killed him, and buried him in the same unmarked grave as his friends. From that point onward, Calderon's empire rapidly began to unravel. Her chief assassin, Sergio El Scar Beltran, killed an escort who'd refused to see him anymore because of his violent behavior. Calderon then kidnapped, tortured, and murdered the girlfriend of a man who went by El Tocho, a narco from her former cartel. She and the escort were buried near Franco and the other 2 victims. The escalating violence and Calderon's unquenchable bloodlust were reported to have become a source of dread for El Chino, her boyfriend and second in command. He was eventually arrested and fully cooperated with law enforcement for a more lenient sentence, revealing the location of the mass grave containing the 5 victims, as well as a list of officers that were on Calderon's payroll, feeding her information. With her source of police tips incapacitated, the 31-year-old crime boss was arrested without incident at Cabo San Lucas Airport on September the 20th of 2015, while she attempted to board a flight to the Sinaloa state capital of Culiacan. Number 9. Abaya and Shazia Dean. 2 sisters and over a dozen of their associates were arrested by police in 2019 as part of an extensive investigation that sought to end a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation. Abaya and Shazia Dean ran a business called The Beauty Booth in Bury, Greater Manchester, which they used as a front for money laundering and drug distribution. The sisters, both in their 40s, joined a total of 20 people that were arrested and ultimately sentenced for the various roles they'd played in the lucrative illegal operation, which ran from December of 2018 to July of 2019. Using their beauty shop to maintain the facade of normalcy, the Deans and their affiliates headed a criminal group that had collaborated with Doncaster-based drug dealer Peter Rafter, aged 57. Shazia's relationship with the latter facilitated the flow of vast quantities of cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and amphetamine through Manchester and into South Yorkshire. Rafter was arrested earlier in 2019 after he was stopped in his Mercedes van and found to be in possession of a firearm, drugs and cash. His 31-year-old daughter, Natalie, took control of the family business in the aftermath and joined forces with Shazia around the time that the matriarch had promoted her 21-year-old son, Hassan, into a leadership position within the gang. By then, however, British law enforcement had initiated Operation Heart and was steadily collecting the evidence required to take them down. Surveillance photos would show Shazia and Natalie conducting a cash drop in the parking lot of Doncaster Prison after the latter had visited her father. Shazia was even pictured holding Natalie's young child in her arms during the handoff. Hassan was also seen passing a large bag, later found to contain over $200,000, to an accomplice in Bury. The Dean sisters' group and the criminal infrastructure that Peter Rafter had built featured their own networks of drug couriers, which law enforcement monitored and gradually arrested in a series of raids. one Manchester dealer was caught with heroin worth nearly $4 million in his van. A safe house used by Shazaya and Abaya was found to hold a large amount of cash, along with cannabis, scales, and a vacuum packing machine. Another raid recovered heroin, scales, and a hydraulic press from a garage in Ashton Old Road, Manchester. The homes of Shazaya and Abaya were also searched, with officers seizing a number of luxury items including a Mercedes, Rolex watches, and a diamond ring estimated at $75,000. Shazaya pleaded guilty to a multitude of drug conspiracy charges, as well as conspiracy to convert and transfer criminal property. She was sentenced to 15 years, while Abaya, who admitted similar charges, was given an 18-year sentence. Hassan and Natalie were also handed hefty sentences, bringing the total number of prison years given to all the members of the conspiracy to 140. Number 8. Raffaella Dalterio. Prior to her arrest by Italian law enforcement in 2012, Raffaella Dalterio had led a Camorra clan in Naples, the operations of which were linked to extortion, drug dealing, robbery, and illegal firearms possession. She'd been at the head of her clan for 6 years, since her husband, 45-year-old Nicola Pianesi, had been gunned down by his gangland adversaries. The man was known as Omusuto, which in local dialect means the big-lipped one, while Dalterio was nicknamed Amicchiona, which translates as the big kitten. She built further ties with the Naples underworld, working to both consolidate and expand the clan's illicit business, which drew the wrath of competitors. 3 years after the violent death of her husband, Dalterio suffered 3 gunshot wounds herself in an ambush, but survived. Her son Raphael was also injured in the shooting. The failed assassination enhanced Dalterio's image as a tried and true crime boss, but she was ultimately brought down by anti-mafia authorities who'd been investigating her activities. In June of 2012, armed police officers in Naples used helicopters and sniffer dogs to conduct a series of dawn raids that resulted in the arrest of 65 people, including 46-year-old Dalterio and her daughters, Caterina and Costanza. The police seized over $10 million in valuables during the operation, which included a Ferrari with a solid gold license plate that had reportedly been gifted to Caterina's boyfriend. Number 7. Nunzia D'Amico. Following the arrest of her crime boss brothers in March of 2014, Italian woman Nunzia D'Amico took the family's reins and headed a branch of the Camorra in Naples. The Camorra traces its roots to the 17th century and represents one of the oldest and largest criminal societies in Italy. Its structure is made up of individual self-governing clans that often feud among themselves. After D'Amico's brothers Salvatore, Giuseppe, and Antonio were taken into custody, she became known as the godmother of Ponticelli, a suburb in the city's east. She handled the family's illegal activities, which reportedly ranged from drug trafficking to ordering beatings and murders against rival clans. Her Camorra affiliates quoted D'Amico as stating that she was a woman, but only on the outside. She reportedly went on to say, "Inside, I'm more man than you, and here in Naples, I rule." In early October of 2015, D'Amico began receiving threats from a clan with which she'd been feuding, but in typical Camorra fashion, didn't report them to the authorities. Sources claimed that she'd felt untouchable due to her position and a code of honor within the organization that traditionally condemned violence against women. On October the 10th of 2015, D'Amico was pushing a pram near her home on Via Flauto Magico. A gunman with a hood pulled over his head, ambushed the 37-year-old crime boss in broad daylight and shot her 4 times, twice in the abdomen and twice in the neck. D'Amico's blood splattered the pram in which her baby slept, but the child was unharmed. She succumbed to her gunshot wounds, with the hit subsequently attributed to Antonio Di Martino, an affiliate of the rival D'Amico clan. Number 6. Claudia Ochoa Felix. Mexican woman Claudia Ochoa Felix was a social media personality who, since 2013, had made national and international headlines for her reported connections with Los Anthrax. The criminal group was a widely feared hit squad, composed of assassins working for the Sinaloa cartel, under the influence of founder Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa, also known as Scarface Reborn and El Chino Anthrax. Felix was romantically linked to him, and following his arrest in 2013, was reported to have assumed a leadership role within the Enforcer branch. She was nicknamed the Empress of Los Anthrax, but publicly denied any affiliation with the criminal organization. Nevertheless, her social media posts would show her living in jet-setting luxury and seemingly glorifying the narco lifestyle. In spite of her attempts to deny her criminal connections, there was no concrete explanation for Felix's immense wealth. Her photos showed her with various weapons, ranging from pistols to assault rifles and even a grenade launcher, as well as being surrounded by armed men. The Kim Kardashian of Mexican organized crime, as the media had dubbed her, was pictured with a folk band that had composed a ballad for Los Anthrax, and the gang's skull symbol was seen on an ammunition clip in one of her photos. Felix had been married to a drug trafficker within the Sinaloa cartel, nicknamed El Chavo Felix, with whom she'd had 3 children. After their relationship ended, she was reportedly involved with gang member Dorian Trinidad Leon Angulo, who died in a car crash shortly after escaping prison in 2011. Felix was eventually linked to Gamboa prior to reports surfacing that she'd become the de facto leader of Los Anthrax. Her position wasn't confirmed by law enforcement, but rumored to have been short-lived, and the extent of her criminal activity while purportedly at the helm remained unclear. Felix died in September of 2019 after a night out in Culiacan, Sinaloa, which she'd posted about on Instagram. Mexican media outlet Milenio reported that an unnamed man had called the paramedics after he'd found Felix unresponsive at her home. He was cleared of any wrongdoing, and her cause of death was reported as an overdose, but suspicions persisted that she'd been assassinated. The Sinaloa State Attorney General, however, told the media that there weren't any active investigations into Felix at the time of her death. Number 5. Virginia Hill. When she was in her late teens, Virginia Hill left her home in Marietta, Georgia, and headed to Chicago, Illinois. At the time in 1933, the city was under the control of the Chicago Outfit, the largest and most powerful organization in the Midwest. It had been led by notorious gangster Al Capone up until his arrest and conviction for tax evasion in 1931. Hill worked as an escort and gradually built connections within the Chicago Outfit, particularly through wealthy bookmaker and gambler Joseph Epstein, who would also become her financial advisor. Contemporaries described Hill as having an excellent memory, as well as the cunning and diplomacy to manage gangland figures. She wasn't regarded as a boss, but her involvement with the criminal organization was crucial in an intelligence sense, as she acted as a courier, facilitating the movement of goods and communication between members. Through her looks, skill at building liaisons, and talents for laundering money, she eventually rose higher than any woman in the national underworld at the time. As reported by law enforcement, Hill enjoyed independent power and became a central clearinghouse within organized crime. She eventually got involved with Charles Fischetti, Capone's cousin and bodyguard. He sent her to New York to spy on Joe Adonis, a captain within the Luciano crime family, and find out if he was paying his duties to the Chicago Outfit. To the rest of the world, Hill posed as a socialite from the South whose husbands had left her considerable wealth following their deaths or as a result of divorce. She became Adonis's lover and teamed up with him in gambling rackets and money laundering. Through Adonis, she met the family's top earner, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, in 1937. They reportedly slept together on the same night they'd met and, a few years later, resumed their whirlwind romance in Los Angeles, California. At the time, Hill had built connections within the LA Mafia and infiltrated the Hollywood elite. She was romantically linked to film stars like Victor Mature and Errol Flynn. Her relationship with Siegel, whom she described as her true love, lasted into the 1940s. For Hill, the volatile love affair would be marked by a life of luxury, but also instances of abuse from the often violent and ill-tempered Siegel. The romance nevertheless captured the country's imagination, and they were later portrayed by Warren Beatty and Annette Bening in the 1991 film Bugsy. Siegel's Las Vegas casino, the Flamingo, gradually faltered, and he refused to pay back other underworld figures who'd invested in the project. On June the 10th of 1947, he was assassinated at Hill's home. There was wide speculation that Hill had been involved, as days earlier she'd taken an unscheduled flight to Paris, France. In the years that followed, she continued moving money and goods for the Luciano family throughout the US and European capitals, frequently depositing money into Swiss bank accounts. In 1951, she appeared before a committee put together by Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver with the purpose of investigating organized crime. By then, she'd married a skiing instructor, had a son, and was living in Washington. Hill's entrance at the hearing was described by one reporter as pure Hollywood pandemonium and something like a movie premiere. She denied having any knowledge of organized crime, even though Time magazine had recently described her as the queen of the gangsters' moles. Spectators reportedly gave her a standing ovation when Kefauver dismissed her. Hill was eventually indicted for income tax evasion in 1954, and she moved to Europe to live with her son. In 1966, at the age of 49, she took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills in Koppel, Austria. Number 4. Cheng Chui Ping. Between 1984 and 2000, Chinese woman Cheng Chui Ping, also known as Sister Ping, ran a massive operation that smuggled people from her home country into the US. Ping was born in 1949 in a poor farming village in the country's north, and she was just an infant when the People's Republic of China was established. She survived the sinking of a rowboat when she was 12 and traveling between villages to gather firewood. She later credited the incident with teaching her to work hard, as the two people who'd sat idly while the others were rowing ended up the dead, while those holding the oar survived. Ping's father lived in the US illegally for 13 years, working as a dishwasher and sending money back to the family. He was caught by immigration officials in 1977 and deported to China, where he reportedly got involved with people smuggling. Ping, who in the meantime had gotten married, found her own way to the US in 1981 after successfully applying to become a nanny in New York City. She settled in Chinatown, Manhattan, with her husband and children and opened up a variety store not long afterwards. Ping became a one-woman smuggling operation as she facilitated the illegal immigration of several of her fellow villagers into the US. She used forged IDs and flew them in on commercial airlines, charging tens of thousands of dollars for her services. She was arrested for human smuggling in the late 1980s, but provided the FBI with valuable information on Chinatown's underworld, which resulted in a plea deal that only saw her serve a few months. Her business grew after her release, particularly in the context of the Tiananmen Square protests, when the US allowed Chinese students already present in the country to stay. The decision also enabled those seeking to enter the country illegally the opportunity to do so by using false paperwork. Ping's smuggling operation grew to such an extent that she began using boats to deliver her human cargo. Once they reached the US, she held them hostage until their smuggling fees, ranging from $25,000 to $45,000, were paid in full. Ping elicited the services of armed thugs from Chinatown's violent gangs who transported and guarded her human cargo in the US. Dozens of people were sometimes smuggled at a time and kept below deck in cargo ships for months with little food or water. One of Ping's smaller vessels sank off the coast of Guatemala, killing 14 people. Ping became known as the underworld's most prolific snakehead, a term attributed to individuals involved in Chinese human smuggling operations. Throughout her criminal career, she was believed to have amassed an estimated $40 million from the illegal transportation of up to 3,000 Chinese people into the US. She was indicted in 1994 in Manhattan Federal Court, but was able to flee to China. She remained there until the spring of 2000, as China didn't have an extradition treaty with the US. and kept conducting her illegal business. Prior to leaving for the US and earning notoriety as a snakehead, Ping and her family had lived in Hong Kong in the 1970s. She was at the time a successful businesswoman and ran a factory in the neighboring city of Shenzhen. Her past provided investigators with valuable insight into her movements. On April the 17th of 2000, Interpol found the name of Ping's son on a passenger list for flights from Hong Kong to New York. Dozens of officers descended on the airport where they arrested Ping, who was found to be in possession of 3 passports, including a fake one through which she tried to pass off as Lily Zheng from Belize. She was sent back to New York in spite of her efforts to fight extradition. She was convicted in June of 2005 of trafficking in ransom proceeds, hostage-taking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit illegal human smuggling. Ping was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Her health gradually declined while she was incarcerated, and the 65-year-old passed away from pancreatic cancer in April of 2014. Number 3. Judy Moran. As the matriarch of the Moran crime family based in Melbourne, Australia, Judy Moran became its boss after the successive violent deaths of her sons and husband. She and her family were notable for their involvement in the Melbourne gangland killings lasting from 1998 to 2010, a period during which violence between feuding factions resulted in the death of at least 36 underworld figures. Judy married Leslie John Johnny Cole in 1963, and they had a son, Mark. Judy and Cole got divorced before the latter was gunned down in Sydney years later during a drug dispute. Judy met Louis Moran in 1966, and in spite of never marrying him, took his last name, as did Mark. Judy then gave birth to Louis's son, Jason. The Morans went into the drug trade, specializing in the manufacture and wholesale distribution of amphetamine-based powders and ecstasy pills. The illegal activity, which involved them forging an alliance with the mostly Italian Carlton crew, would eventually wreak chaos on the family. Tensions had been brewing since the early 1990s, when Melbourne was dubbed the amphetamine capital of Australia. On October the 13th of 1999, Jason and Mark Moran met with Carl Williams, who turned 29 on that day, in the suburb of Gladstone Park. A conflict erupted, sparked by disagreements relating to their amphetamine dealings. The brothers shot Williams in the stomach, but he survived and vowed to exterminate the family. The pre-existing power struggle in Melbourne reached a new level of violence, with the key figures consisting of Williams, the Morans, and their respective allies. Mark was shot dead outside his luxury home in Aberfeldy in June of 2000. Williams had contracted assassin Victor Brincat, nicknamed The Runner, who fatally shot Jason and an associate in a suburban hotel parking lot in June of 2003. Louis was then gunned down in a Brunswick club in 2004, with Williams subsequently admitting to orchestrating his and Jason's murders following his arrest. In the aftermath, Judy was reported to have assumed control of the family, even though she publicly feigned ignorance about the amphetamine trade, which had built and continued to fund her lavish lifestyle. She became somewhat of a media darling, cultivating the persona of a victim of circumstance and a woman more preoccupied with luxury than crime. Her matriarchal reign was reportedly challenged and openly disliked by Louis's brother, Desmond Tuppence Moran. Additionally, he and Judy feuded over the fortune that Louis had purportedly left behind in the wake of his assassination. Judy's strongest remaining allies were 45-year-old Suzanne Kane, who was late Jason's sister-in-law, and her partner, 43-year-old Jeffrey Armour. In early 2009, the couple's trucking operation in Western Australia had failed, and they were in severe debt. When Armour traveled to Melbourne, he stayed with Judy, who contracted him for Desmond's assassination. Desmond survived an attempt on his life in March 2009, when a bullet passed through his window and lodged in the steering wheel. DNA lifted from a disguise dumped nearby was later found to be a match for Armour. On June the 15th, 2 masked gunmen approached 61-year-old Desmond as he drank a coffee in an Ascot Vale cafe, and one of them shot him multiple times, killing him. Judy arrived at the scene within 15 minutes and desperately cried out Desmond's name. The following day, she was arrested along with Armour, Kane, and a man by the name Michael Farrugia, who would become the prosecution's star witness. He claimed that Judy had driven him and Armour to the cafe where the latter had carried out the hit. The police found that Judy had concealed the getaway car in her garage before abandoning it in bushes on a Brunswick street. The authorities obtained a search warrant for her home, where they discovered a safe containing 3 handguns, 2 stolen Victorian license plates, as well as a wig and clothing which matched witness descriptions of what the gunman had been wearing. On the night that followed her arrest on June the 16th, Judy's home in Ascot Vale was set ablaze in what was reported as an arson attack. Her life as a criminal mastermind and self-declared homemaker had effectively ended on all fronts. Armour pleaded guilty to murder and on August the 10th of 2011 was sentenced to 26 years in prison with a minimum of 21 years served. A jury found Judy guilty of murdering Desmond and she was given the same sentence as Armour, while Kane was handed a suspended 2-year sentence.
Hey, it's Carl. Be sure to subscribe and leave your comments in the comments section below, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get your video going next.
Number 2. Esmeralda Aravel Flores Acosta. In July of 2016, a Salvadorian woman only identified as Monica met Esmeralda Aravel Flores Acosta through a mutual friend. Acosta, a former hairdresser in her late 30s, initially offered Monica live-in domestic work, but the underlying motive for her recruitment would soon be revealed. Under the guise of delivering food to a neighbor, Acosta led the woman to a house where she was ambushed by Wilber Javier Caceres Benitez, also known as El Guay. His face and body were covered in tattoos, indicating that he belonged to Mara Salvatrucha, commonly known as MS-13, an international crime organization infamous for its use of extreme violence. Benitez, who at the time was in an intimate relationship with Acosta, put a gun to Monica's head and told her that she'd have to do whatever they asked or else her family would be killed. The wider scheme gradually emerged. Acosta, aided by her sisters and other accomplices, ran a gang that would come to be known as the Black Widows. They'd masterminded a human trafficking ring which recruited young women and forced them into marriage. The men they targeted were instructed to sign life insurances before the union, while being led to believe that their brides had the necessary documents for them to begin a new life in the US. Shortly thereafter, they were murdered by Acosta's MS-13 affiliates, and the gang collected on their life insurance payouts through the widows. While under Acosta's control, Monica married 31-year-old Melvin Ostmaro Reyes Rosa in September of 2016. He was gunned down at a bus stop not far from where the ceremony had taken place a little over a month later. Rosa's phone and wallet had been taken by the MS-13 assassins so that his death would look like a robbery. His bullet-riddled body had been left unrecognizable, and Monica, who was called by the police to identify his remains, only realized it was Rosa by the clothes he'd been wearing. Monica played the part of the grieving widow as instructed by Acosta. From her marriage alone, the Black Widows collected $60,000. They'd run the scheme before, amassing at least $100,000 according to the BBC. Monica was never paid anything. Instead, like the other women held captive by the gang, she was routinely beaten into submission with a wooden bat by Acosta. Monica then realized she was also going to be killed following an exchange with her captor. Acosta had become enraged when the young woman told her that upon collecting her husband's policy, she'd been offered free life insurance but didn't have the necessary documents to sign for it. In January of 2017, Monica told her captor that she was going to visit her family, but instead went to the police. She'd gathered considerable evidence beforehand, including marriage documents, Rosa's death certificate, and papers pertaining to insurance payouts, as well as photos documenting the beatings she'd received. Acosta sent Monica a series of threatening messages upon realizing she was gone. Law enforcement was able to protect Monica's family before MS-13 could get to them. Acosta was arrested along with her accomplices in late November of 2017. on charges of aggravated human trafficking, conspiracy to commit aggravated homicide, and aggravated fraud. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison in May of 2019. Her case was unique as it was the first to be prosecuted in connection to forced marriage in El Salvador, and also for her close ties to MS-13, in spite of the organization's traditionally adversarial stance on collaborating with women. Number 1. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco was by all accounts the epitome of a female crime boss, rising from humble beginnings to dominate the cocaine trade, often through violence, in areas of her native Colombia and in the US. Blanco was born in Cartagena in 1943 and moved to Medellin when she was 3 years old. As reported by one of her former lovers, Blanco's foray into crime began when she was only 11 years old. She reportedly kidnapped a boy from a wealthy family and fatally shot him when his family didn't pay the ransom. In the years that followed, Blanco became a pickpocket and an escort before eventually meeting her first husband, Carlo Trujillo, with whom she had 3 children. The marriage didn't last, and it was widely suspected that Blanco had him killed at some point in the 1970s. She was introduced to cocaine trafficking by her second husband, Alberto Bravo, and became highly proficient in the trade at a time when the Medellin cartel was ruled by Fabio Ochoa and Pablo Escobar. She and Bravo illegally entered the US in the mid-1970s and established a base of operations in Queens, New York City, where they developed a unique method of bringing drugs into the city from their Colombian connections. They had young women fly on planes with cocaine hidden in their bras and underwear in special compartments that Blanco had designed. Business was blooming, but in 1975, Blanco and Bravo were targeted by a joint NYPD-DEA sting called Operation Banshee. The latter had already left to consolidate export efforts in Colombia, and Blanco was able to flee and join him. A disagreement between them over stolen money resulted in Bravo's death. It was said that Blanco pulled the gun from her boots and shot Bravo in the face as he shot her in the abdomen with an Uzi submachine gun. There were, however, reports that Escobar had actually ordered Bravo's death. Nevertheless, with 2 husbands suffering violent deaths, Blanco became known as the Black Widow and was in full control of the cocaine empire. By the late 1970s, she'd moved to Miami and gradually built a reputation as the godmother of cocaine, playing a major role in the drugs' influx into the city. She had a 4th son with her 3rd husband, bank robber Dario Sepulveda, and named the boy Michael, which was a tribute to the Godfather and a clear indication that she'd fully embraced her reputation. She later had Sepulveda killed after he'd fled to Colombia with Michael, which only added to her infamy. Blanco was a key figure in what would be known as the Miami Drug Wars or the Cocaine Cowboy Wars in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when competing factions such as Cuban dealers and the Medellin cartel battled for control of the lucrative drug trade. Blanco hosted wild parties and lived lavishly, owning a private jet, luxury homes and vehicles, but simultaneously fought for her territory with infamous ruthlessness. In one incident, on July the 11th of 1979, her assassins brazenly gunned down a rival dealer at the Crown Liquor Store in the Dadeland shopping mall, injuring several workers. They arrived at the location in an armored delivery van, which law enforcement described as a war wagon, as it had gun ports cut into the 1/4-inch thick steel covering its sides. At the height of her power, Blanco oversaw a billion-dollar enterprise that moved over 1.5 tons of cocaine into the US every month. Blanco reportedly employed a kill-first attitude against her rivals, which was characterized by an utter lack of concern for collateral victims. She was notable for her use of motorbike riding assassins during hits, a technique she was credited with pioneering on the streets of Medellin. She was reported to have ordered the deaths of at least 200 people. Miami devolved into a war zone and turned into the murder capital of the world by the mid-1980s. With increasing pressure from her Medellin rivals and the DEA, Blanco retreated to California, where she was arrested by the agency in February of 1985. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for conspiring to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine. Her former hitman, Jorge Rivi, Ayala Riviera testified against her, which resulted in Blanco pleading guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder in 1998. She was given 20 years to run concurrently with her previous sentence. Blanco was released in 2004 and deported to Medellin, where by then she'd made more enemies than friends. She largely remained out of the public eye, and on the night of September the 3rd of 2012 was fatally shot in the head by a gunman on a motorcycle as she was leaving a butcher shop. Blanco was 69 years old when she died. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be in perfect health for the rest of your life or instantly get $10 million? Let us know in the comments section below.